Hello and welcome to In-Depth Express Analysis dated 21st of May 2025. Let's now begin the discussion with a good news where for all of us, Rolls-Royce is going to become a very cheap car in some time to come. So instead of costing 12 to 14 crore rupees, it is going to cost minimally in the range of 7 to 8 crore now. The first article for today's discussion appears on opinion page. Not just a trade deal. And I think this is one of the most unique ways to highlight the free trade agreement that India and UK have recently finalized. Because truly, it is just not a trade deal. It is way beyond than that, as you will see in some time from now. India-UK Free Trade Agreement is a major milestone in India-UK relations, which has strengthened diplomatic and economic ties as part of their comprehensive strategic partnership. Overall, from the perspective of civil services examination, this particular discussion is extremely pertinent from the perspective of GS Paper 2 as well as GS Paper 3, but more relevant for GS Paper 2 International Relation, where the syllabus clearly highlights effects of developed countries on India's interests. So in the upcoming discussion, we will first understand what a free trade agreement is, what are general benefits of free trade agreement. Then we will move on and understand specific terms that might be important from the prelims point of view, like tariff structure changes, tariff privilege sectors, recognition of professional qualifications, ESG chapters, double contribution convention. And once we are done with all of that, we'll understand the specific advantages to both UK as well as India of this particular free trade agreement. The expectation is that after going through this discussion, you will be in a situation to answer these two specific mains questions. Let's now begin the discussion. Let's start by understanding free trade agreement. It is an agreement between two or more nations. Yes, you heard it right. In this particular case, it would be just between India and UK, but it can be between n number of countries. For example, a regional free trade agreement between multiple countries. So it can be an agreement between two or more nations, let's say in this particular instance between A and B, which establish fair rule, which seeks to establish fair set of rules for trade and commerce as far as it is in between country A and B is concerned, which basically has to do with reduction or elimination of various trade barriers. Now, what can be some of the barriers to the trade? Since time immemorial, the states have protected or have sought to protect their domestic industries from imports by using tariff as well as non-tariff barriers. Tariff barriers include, most simply put, import duties, and there are various non-tariff barriers, which are not the import duty but different kinds of restrictions that are put on imports. For example, specifying a particular minimum level of quality of imports. So for example, if a country A says that we are not going to accept any automobile which does not have 5-star rating, and let's say most of the vehicles manufactured in B have 3 or 4-star rating, it would indirectly curb the trade or would act as a barrier to the trade of country B. So free trade agreements are agreement between two or more nations establishing a fair set of rules for trade and commerce to reduce or eliminate various kinds of trade barriers, and they should be legally binding commitment. Because unless and until these commitments are legally binding, no country is going to rely upon that. So whenever these two or more countries enter into these kinds of agreement, there is a particular sequence that has to be followed by these countries. When these two countries generally come together, the first conversation is around reduction in the trade barriers, mainly on goods, because these are the most easier ones to restrict or to cut down, which means the nation states start by reducing tariff barriers on goods, import duty, and then they move towards non-tariff barriers. Once goods are sorted, then generally the countries move towards easing the restrictions in matters of services. Now, services are more complicated than it seemed like. Good is just manufactured at one place and then an inanimate, inorganic substance is transported. When it comes to services, it is about a movement of people as well. And so, once there is a good level of confidence with respect to the preferential treatment of goods from one country to another, then the countries move towards services and investments, easing the trade barriers in services as well as investments by giving each other service exports preferential access to their own market. And this hierarchy of integration between two countries is generally reflected in various terminologies. For instance, it is reflected in terms of a preferential trade agreement, a free trade agreement, then regional trade agreement among multiple countries generally shows increasing order of integration. Then you must have heard about CECA, Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, or SEPA, Partnership Agreement, or bilateral. So you can see that these different terms denote different things. Generally, they denote increasing integration or increasing resolve to help each other countries in terms of reduction of tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade, services, and investment. Now, if you objectively want to ask a question as to why these two countries would ever want to come into these kinds of agreements, the answer can be very plain as well as simple. So, for instance, in this particular example, if there is another country C, let's say both A and B levy 20% import duty on goods that is exported from C, and A and B enter into a free trade agreement of waiving of complete import duty, which means 0% is attracted as far as their exports into each other country is concerned. You can see a particular commodity, let's say a cloth or maybe a car, exported from C will attract 20%, making it expensive as compared to cars manufactured in A and B, which will not attract and will be treated just like a domestic manufacturing. So by coming into an agreement, these two countries have gained benefit over non-member country C. Also, the free trade agreements offer huge ease of negotiation. Because if you look at other trade agreement, that is WTO, now WTO is having a very vast membership. So there are more than 190 countries that are members of WTO. And you know that any kind of decision making in WTO can only happen on the basis of consensus, which means unless and until all the member countries of WTO agree to a decision, it will not become effective, which has throttled or prevented WTO from taking any kind of major decision. Now, when 2, 3, 4 countries enter into free trade agreement, they have this freedom, they have this flexibility where they can arrive at decisions. It is the quickest way, a quicker way to increase the market size. A acting on its own had this much market. B, or economy of the B acting alone, had only this much market. By waiving off the import and export duties to countries to exports from each other, basically both A and B have doubled their economy. Larger the economy, larger is the scope of development or economical growth. Also, you can see by entering into binding agreement with another country and whatever commitments are made which become effective, basically countries lock their reforms in perpetuity, where the reversal from the commitment becomes difficult, no U-turn possible. So whatever India would agree to UK and vice versa, whatever UK would agree with India, that is locked in perpetuity. And in that sense, it is a way of modernizing the economy and the trade operations. Also, it has an effect of strengthening the diplomatic relation between the two countries, and it signals openness of the countries to investors. And so overall, you can see there are multiple advantages to free trade agreements. So you can see that a free trade agreement is a trade agreement under which partner nations pledge to remove significantly custom tariff and non-tariff barriers on the majority of products and frequently liberalize services and investment norms. Now, FTAs are more than WTO's most favored nation rates by extending the preferential access to one another's market. So, what is WTO's most favored nation rates? Whenever a country becomes a member of WTO, they have to extend the minimum rates or minimum import duty to all other pre-existing members of WTO. So for example, let's say a new country X, as soon as it becomes the member of WTO, they will have to extend the minimum import duty that it applies. Let's say, for instance, in the field of textile, let's say the country X imposes 5% import duty on all imports under textile category. So this minimum 5% will have to be extended to all the members of WTO. That is why it is not favored nation, it is most favored nation. All the members of WTO automatically become most favored nation. However, there are few exceptions to this rule. Number one exception is that this country X violate this rule for the matters of national or internal security. So similarly, even though both Pakistan and India are member of WTO, oftentimes they revoke most favored nation to each other because of their troubling ties. And at the same time, X can give or offer lower than 5% rates to all those people or all those countries with which it has signed a free trade agreement. So for example, a country X signs a free trade agreement with another country Y. They both decide to impose 2% import duty on each other products. That is possible. It is lower than 5%. So you can see that India-UK FTA, for instance, is an across-the-board agreement that encompasses goods, services, investment protections, intellectual property rights, and mechanisms for settling disputes consistent with WTO provisions. The next key term is tariff structure changes. Under the India-UK FTA, the UK will eliminate import duties on about 99% of tariff lines for Indian goods, covering nearly 100% of India's exports by value from day one. In return, India will progressively reduce or remove tariffs on around 90% of the British product lines over a stage period of up to 10 years. Now you can see that there is an asymmetry in tariff liberalization. Why? Because when we are dealing with two countries, UK and India, when it comes to Indian exports to UK, almost 100% of the goods by value will have 0% duty from day one. But when it comes to UK, British exports to India, it is not going to be zero and it is never going to be zero. In fact, it is going to be around in the range of 4 to 16% over a period of 10 years. So the reduction will be gradual. This is called tariff structure changes, which is about asymmetric tariff liberalization. One country will do more than the other country. Then another key term that has appeared is recognition of professional qualifications, which has to do with the liberalization of the service sector of each other countries. So the free trade agreement sets the stage for more streamlined mutual recognition of qualification between India and UK. Both parties have agreed to list professional bodies such as accounting bodies, CAs, architects, engineers, and doctors, and invite them to negotiate mutual recognition agreements. These agreements would translate to an Indian architect or CA qualification being recognized in UK and vice versa. So as I said, that the countries first liberalize trade between and among them. And when they move to services, you know that services like education, medicine, they are subject to qualifications which can vary from one country to another. So for example, it could be easier to become a doctor in A and it could be more difficult to become a doctor in B. The regulation of the medicine could be very difficult and strict in A, it could be liberalized or very casual in B. Now the doctors coming from B cannot be trusted by the society of A. And that is why first they have to work out mutual rules which will subject each other educational institutions, and they will make sure that whenever the degrees come from selected set of institutions, they would be recognizable. After the finalization of mutual recognition agreement, MRAs, the professionals from India can practice in UK, and professionals from UK could practice in India, which is so far not possible. You must have heard about doctors around you going from India to UK or in US and then preparing for 5 to 6 years to get the recognition to qualify the exams that are domestically applicable. It is not an automatic thing. This will be done through commitment. So how will this be done? This will be done through a commitment professional services working group that will oversee the process and track progress. While regulators still have the freedom to determine standards, this arrangement is supposed to make it easier for qualified professionals to practice in one other nations, promoting service trade integration and mobility. Then the trade agreement has another key term: traffic privileged sectors. FTA provides FTA provides invaluable benefits for India's labor intensive export industries. Major industries including apparel and textiles, leather goods and footwear, gems and jewelry, sport equipments, toys, engineering items, auto parts, and organic chemicals will witness tariffs in UK reduced to zero. These industries presently contribute a significant proportion of India's exports and are a source of employment for millions. Duty-free entry in UK market puts them ahead of foreign competitors. For instance, Indian textiles, leather, footwear that had attracted moderate tariffs will now be entering the UK market just like UK products, 0% duty, thus being more economical to UK purchasers. This is likely to significantly enhance India's goods competitiveness in the UK compared to other nations. So these are tariff privileged sectors. So you can see apparel, textile, toys, leather goods, sports equipment, footwear, gems and jewelries. Then the free trade agreement document has ESG chapter. What does this ESG means? These are new generation chapters on environment, labor, gender and anti-corruption. The first in Indian free trade agreement. So India has signed a lot of free trade agreements, but never a chapter was included on these matters that are related to justice. The chapters pledge both nations to maintain high level of environmental protection and protection of labor rights, ensuring gender equality in trade and collaborate on anti-corruption efforts. For example, provisions related to concerns such as sustainable supply chains and not lowering environment or labor laws to attract trade are included. The addition of gender and development aspects implies that the agreement recognizes the effects of trade on women and vulnerable groups. Such provisions lift FTA from trade to a sustainable and inclusive development tool. So what looks like purely an economic document becomes a social document as well. Then double contribution convention or social security waiver has been provided. So what is it? So it exempts Indian professionals temporarily working in UK and their employers from contributing to UK's social security fund for up to 3 years. It avoids double payments. Workers will keep paying to Indian systems such as Employees Provident Fund without paying the UK national insurance simultaneously. The waiver is a major cost saver. Approximately 20% of the salary for Indian IT and service firms working in UK, which according to ballpark figure stands around more than 60,000 Indian employees working there, they are likely to gain with total savings worth 4,000 crore per annum. And not only does this enhances the competitiveness on Indian service in UK by reducing the labor cost of hiring Indians, but it also fixes a mobility problem for professionals long plaguing them. Then there are certain protected sectors. India has excluded or protected sensitive industries to safeguard domestic interests. For example, agricultural commodities such as dairy, apples, cheese, oats, and edible oils are on the exclusion list of FTAs. No duty concessions on these will be provided by India to UK. Some industrial products are also excluded. For example, sensitive electronics and engineering products. For certain goods, India committed to gradual tariff cuts over extended phases. For example, certain chemicals, petroleum goods, and automobiles to permit domestic industry to adapt. Tariff rate quotas were employed for goods such as British cars. Tariffs on automobile will fall from 100% to 10%, but only for small quantity, 40,000 units of luxury cars. So right now it is 100% level on Rolls Royce. Now, if you want to buy Rolls Royce, it is going to get cheaper with time. So instead of costing 10 to 12 crore rupees, it is going to cost around 6 to 7 crore rupees in 1 year from now. Similarly, the sharp 150% import tariff on gin and Scotch whisky will be reduced to 75% with effect from now and will be phased down to 40% over 10th year. These measured openings are such that while consumers are provided with access to low-cost imported items, indigenous manufacturers in sensitive industries are not blown away by imports overnight. So you can see overall India's free trade agreement with UK so far looks like an extremely measured agreement. Now, when you look at the overall benefit that this particular trade agreement has to yield, especially for India, it has a strategic and non-strategic significance for India. Let's start with the strategic partnership and trade diplomacy. You have to realize that this agreement carries weight well beyond commerce. It cements India-UK relationship at a time when both nations seek reliable partners. UK, after Brexit, is keen on major trade deals, and India offers a huge market. India, on the other hand, has stayed out of RCEP, a mega trade trans-Pacific partnership which India backed out at the last moment. And since then, India has been pursuing bilateral pacts to diversify its portfolio. Observers note that FTA is arguably UK's most significant bilateral trade since Brexit, underlying India's importance as a trading partner. Strategically, FTA deepens trust and ties between the two major democracies of the world. At the same time, it enhances India's global trade leverage. A country like India, if India is able to get into free trade agreement with UK, then obviously the doors are open for other countries to negotiate FTA as well. At the same time, if you have been following newspapers regularly, you must have realized a recurring theme in India's trade strategy is to move up the value chain, exporting from finished and high value products rather than raw material or low value goods. FTAs can accelerate this shift. With zero duty access for Indian engineering goods, pharma goods, and textile goods, processed foods, Indian firms can more competitively export these high value added products to UK market, which supports India's Make in India initiative. This crucially helps Indian industry to earn more per unit of export and reduces over reliance on commodity exports like raw textile or basic agricultural goods. For example, instead of just raw cotton or yarn, India can now export more ready-made garments to UK. Instead of raw leather, more finished leather products. Such transition supports Make in India again by incentivizing renowned service sector stands to gain considerably. The FTA opens up Britain's service market with one of the most liberal commitments that UK has made in modern times, especially dealing with IT, information technology, financial service professionals like doctors and CAs. UK has promised improved visa regime for Mode 4 services, where the services can only be provided by movement of natural persons. So, for example, opening up of UK universities or their campuses in our country which will have the freedom of the UK employees. For example, Oxford campus in Manesar or Jhajjar. Would it include, or can it include, the human resource of Oxford University, which would include people from all around the globe? The answer is yes. And so the UK is going to provide a more assured visa regime for categories like short term business visitors, intra company transfers, contractual service suppliers, independent professionals. So, in practical terms, skilled Indian professionals from software engineers and consultant to chefs and yoga instructors will find it easier to work in UK under special quotas. The removal of double security contribution, which we have discussed, further encourages mobility by reducing the costs. At the same time, India UK FTA showcases India's nuanced approach to globalization, embracing free trade where beneficial but guarding strategic autonomy, especially in critical areas. We have seen how India has been able to protect its sensitive sectors related to agriculture, dairy, and sophisticated electronic equipments by excluding them or phasing out tariffs very, very slowly. So, by calibrating openness with protective measures, India aims to derive maximum benefit out of FTAs while retaining the freedom to chart its own economic course, maintaining regulatory sovereignty. Who will regulate on behalf of India? Only India. And no one else can make that decision to balance the globalization. The inclusion, especially of chapters related to ESG that we have seen, represents a modern approach to trade governance, which promotes inclusive and sustainable trade. By agreeing to uphold labor rights and environmental standards, both nations ensure that economic gains do not come at the cost of worker exploitation or environmental degradation, preventing a race to bottom as far as standards are concerned, which aligns with India's modern trade norms and drives domestic reforms. As we have seen, once it is committed to UK, they are locked in perpetuity. And finally, beyond immediate trade gains, FTA is likely to catalyze bilateral investment flows and technology partnerships, easier market access, and improved ease of doing business with provisions like digital trade, intellectual property, investor protection make India more attractive for UK investors and vice versa. There are huge opportunities in clean energy, infra, and pharma. Joint ventures are anticipated, and innovation ecosystems will synergize each other. Boosting public procurement access is also one of the major initiatives of free trade agreements, where the UK government anticipates significant opportunity in India's expanding public procurement market, especially in transport, healthcare, and green growth sectors. Now, the UK industries will be able to participate in government tenders. The next article that we have taken up has appeared on the Indian Express opinion page. Now, if you look at this article, it has been written by a very prominent international relations scholar, Mr. C. Rajamohan. And he uses a very specific heading. The title of the text is Trump Proofing India-US Relationships, which means that how to protect the long-lasting and ever-improving India-US relationship from probably the last term of Donald Trump. In this particular write-up, author focuses on two specific takeaways which are extremely pertinent from the perspective of GS Paper 2 syllabus: effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests, Indian diaspora. One of the aspects that he talks about is the specific problem created as a result of Trump 2.0. And then he talks about how and in what ways India can respond to immunize India-US relationship. So while India and US have spent over 2 decades building strategic trust and deepening partnership, recent developments indicate that much of this understanding could be undone. And not through war, but through words and unpredictable leadership style of this single person. Author clearly highlights two clear trends that have the ability to mar India-US relation or hurt India-US relations. For instance, Trump's shift on Kashmir and Pakistan, which can lead to a strategic breakdown between India and US. Remember, since Kargil conflict in 1999, US has gradually moved away from its Cold War favorable tilt towards Pakistan. For instance, under successive US presidents, starting from Bush, followed by Obama, followed by Trump, followed by Biden, the US adopted a de-hyphenated South Asia policy, which basically means that engaging with India and Pakistan separately and not coupling them, which basically calls for bilateral dialogue without any mediation. So when India so when US will interact with India, the condition will not be that of Pakistan, or when it will interact with Pakistan, the condition will not that be of India. And this obviously culminated in strong support for India, even during very sensitive events. For instance, surgical strikes conducted by India in Balakot 2019, followed by abrogation of Article 317 Kashmir, where US quietly but firmly blocked Pakistan efforts in the United Nations. However, look at the Trump's current line of thought and rhetoric. He has equated India and Pakistan in terms of trade and geopolitics, which is a highly inaccurate comparison. He claimed credit for India Pakistan ceasefire efforts, implying back channel intervention by him or maybe leadership. And he undermined India's long standing position that Kashmir is a bilateral issue and not open for mediation or negotiation. And these statements signal a possible return to US meddling in Kashmir question, something India has successfully resisted since 1990s. The second important trend identified by the author is the destructive diplomacy, or a very peculiar style of functioning of Trump, especially in his second term. He highlights that key foreign policy staff in White House are missing. Institutions like State Department and National Security Council are being equally sidelined. And Trump alone is setting the agenda, ignoring even policies developed in his own first term. For example, Trump's first term South Asia strategy in 2017 was clear. It criticized Pakistan for sheltering terror groups and positioned India as a key strategic ally in Asia. But now, that clarity has vanished. Even foundational foreign policy doctrines like US competition with China and Russia have been replaced with vague calls for collaboration, even with dictators and autocrats. And to make things worse, there are reports which are quite unverified but could still be true that deal with Trump family business interests in Pakistan, especially investment in Pakistan cryptocurrency businesses. If true, this could create an ethical dilemma or concern between personal and statecraft, between personal and public interests. And that is why the author suggests a mature four-part Indian strategy that is already in motion. The first one is that we don't have to panic. India has already sustained pressure on previous occasions. For example, when India conducted nuclear experiments earlier, Clinton regime imposed heavy sanctions and India weathered that, tolerated that. According to the author, India is now the world's fourth largest economy and is a confident diplomatic actor. So panic should not, it's completely unnecessary. At the same time, author insists on avoiding confrontation. India is not reacting to Trump's daily provocations and instead it continues quiet engagement across sectors. For instance, defense, trade, climate change, energy, keeping the dialogue alive. At the same time, author wants us to realize that Trump may control the White House, but America is not White House, or America is not just White House. America and the American state is way beyond. For example, you have states. America is a federation, so states are very powerful. You have Congress, which is not controlled by Trump. Then you have think tanks. which are not controlled by Trump. Then you have American corporations, which India can engage, which can set the narrative and a strong narrative in favor of India in US domestic politics. And after that, we need to realize that diversification in terms of partnerships is crucial. The US is important, but it is not irreplaceable. India is building stronger ties with France, Greece, Denmark, which was obviously visible during the recent Kashmir problem. In fact, the closest allies or partners seem like a natural partner to United States of America. EU, they themselves are frustrated and, to say the least, disillusioned with Trump policies. And so, to sum it up, Trump's return to White House has introduced fresh volatility in India-US relations. But India is no longer the reactive power it was once. With maturity and diversification and banking upon internal strength, India is positioned not just to manage the disruption but to emerge more resilient and confident. The next article is written by a very prominent person, Nirupama Rao, who was the foreign secretary of our country, and then she retired to lead a very important think tank located in US. And she examines a significant transformation in India's security environment. A development that moves India-Pakistan conflict beyond the traditional binary and into a strategic triangle involving China and the United States. Because according to her, this latest confrontation between India and Pakistan is structurally different from earlier episodes. The question is why? The answer is that now China has not only emerged as a diplomatic defender of Pakistan, but also a military enabler of Pakistan. And that's what the point that she wants to make in this editorial. So far, China had only supported Pakistan diplomatically in various forums, United Nations, but now it has become what, according to other scholars, have characterized it as two-front reinforced war. Rather than India fighting Pakistan along Pakistan border, China along India-China border, India actually fought both China and Pakistan together on Pakistan border. At the same time, US has revived its Cold War era instinct for crisis management, reducing a strategic dispute to both side problem. As if this is a problem that is towards both the sides of the border, with Pakistan as well as India. Now, her analysis would be extremely crucial not only for India and its neighborhood relations, China and Pakistan, but also effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest and Indian diaspora. Pakistan's JF-17J-10C fighter jets, Wing Lung drones and HQ-9B air defense systems are all Chinese supplied. And this is not mere procurement, it is a strategic interoperability where doctrines and platforms both are shared, and combat readiness is symbiotic, where both the nation help each other not just in the use, training, as well as in designing the response as well. And so, as a result of which, India must now prepare for two-front conflict. Chinese systems in Pakistani hands, potentially supported by real-time Chinese intelligence, intel, surveillance, as well as reconnaissance. At the same time, though India and US have deepened their ties, especially for example in defense. For instance, we know that we have three-level defense agreement in the form of BECA, LIMUA, as well as COMCASA. And we also have Indo-Pacific frameworks like Quad. But the US instinct in South Asian crisis remains the same, to mediate and to de-escalate. And so, even as India seeks strategic autonomy and global status, US crisis diplomacy risks reducing India to a regional player, tied with Pakistan. And so, instead of de-hyphenation, it is re-hyphenation, again coupling India and Pakistan, against which India had worked so long to dismantle. Also, India's recent signaling around Indus Water Treaty is a very, very significant hint. The India clearly indicated that it is not going to interrupt it or disrupt it immediately, but the message was loud and clear. No agreement, and which means no agreement is off limits if India is provoked. And remember, Indus Water Treaty is a treaty that survived multiple wars and hostilities, and it remained as a symbol of stability. But any hint at its re-evaluation has international implications. For example, it raises ecological and diplomatic alarms. It invites Chinese scrutiny given their stake in a regional water distribution or hydrology. What this escalation has done is that it has asserted a new deterrent posturing. It has delivered domestic political message very clearly, and it has signaled internationally that India will not tolerate proxy wars. So this messaging is absolutely clear. However, repeated military exchanges draw India back into regional framework where it is seen as a South Asian crisis actor rather than a global stabilizing force. And so in conclusion, we can say that this is not a breakdown but a strategic recalibration. India today faces a US that mediates more than it aligns, a China that arms and enables conflicts, a Pakistan that is emboldened because of the above two factors. And India's response, hence, must be to engage wherever necessary, de escalate without loss of face, and continue building its image as a global actor and not just as a regional stakeholder. The next news is related to whether all those viewers with LLB degree can immediately appear for judiciary examination or not. And the answer clearly is no, because of the yesterday's judgment by the Judiciary Supreme Court. Because just yesterday, Supreme Court restored the 3-year minimum practice requirement for law graduates to apply for judicial services, specifically civil judge junior division posts, which was basically the norm until 2002 in our country. Under All India Association case, Supreme Court had removed the requirement of 3 years of practice to allow the fresh talent into lower judiciary. But later on, slowly and gradually, various high courts across the country started realizing that in last 23 years, lack of practical court experience has affected or impacted judicial efficiency negatively. It was realized that since judges deal with very sensitive matters related to life, liberty, property and reputation, and they have to do it from the day one. Although the judges during these period were put to pre-service training, but that was not a substitute for actually practicing law in the courts. And that is why the Supreme Court felt that last 20 years of appointment of fresh graduates has not been a successful experiment in the field of law, because of which yesterday Supreme Court reinstated 3-year practice requirement. And so from now onwards, 3 years of bar practice has become mandatory for judicial service aspirants. The certification required will be from an advocate who himself or herself has at least 10 plus years of standing. Experience as a law clerk to a judge can also count in the 3 years period, and new recruits must also undergo 1 year of judicial training. So in total you can see 4 years. 3 years before you qualify exam, and then after that 1 year of probation period before you become judge. Now the question is, what are the constitutional articles that are attracted as a result of this particular issue? If you look at the Constitution of India, Article 233, 234 and Article 235 deal with the appointment of district or lower than district judiciary. Article 233 deals with the appointment of district judges by the governor in consultation with the high courts. It requires the candidate to be an advocate of at least 7 years in case of district judge. Article 234 deals with the recruitment of persons other than district judges to the judicial service of the state, made by the governor in consultation with the State Public Service Commission and the High Court. Article 235 deals with the control over subordinate courts by the high courts. And so you can see the common name appearing everywhere is high courts. Without high courts, the government or the governor cannot proceed with the appointment or transfer of the district judges. And that is where the High Court themselves together sort of requested the Supreme Court to lay down a common rule across the country, which was laid down yesterday in the form of the judgment. And remember, any law declared by the Supreme Court is binding on all courts, which means it is binding now on all high courts. So all the high courts will have to follow this particular order. The next two discussions deal with passing away of two prominent Indian scientists, public educationists, and leaders of our society, Mr. Jayant Narlikar and M.R. Srinivasan. You know that previously UPSC has asked questions with respect to these public personalities who have contributed to India's science and technology. The importance of these two people, especially Jayant Narlikar, can be realized that in the single day's edition of Indian Express, there are 1, 2, 3, and 4, at least 4 pieces of news articles on his life. His life as a teacher, his life as the most prominent propounder of challenge to Big Bang theory, and a column on editorial page. That should be sufficient to demonstrate the stature of this man. Two of its biggest contribution is the propounding of steady state theory with Fred Hoyle, which has acted as an alternative to Big Bang theory. So we know that Big Bang theory focuses on one single explosion to create or for the creation of the universe. On the other hand, the steady state theory propounded by Narlikar suggests that universe has no beginning and no end. And it suggests that it looks almost the same at all the times. They together proposed that new matter is constantly created to keep the density of the universe the same as it expands. So what cannot be denied is the expansion of the universe. But in order to maintain the same density, continuously a new matter is being created. You should understand that it is no longer the dominant theory, but it challenged the mainstream thinking and led to better tests of cosmological models. It also introduced the idea of continuous creation, which was bold and unique. Then in terms of quantum cosmology, or blending the big and the small, was his second biggest contribution to the field of science. Quantum cosmology tries to apply quantum physics to understand the whole universe, especially what happened in earliest moments after the Big Bang. Now, when it comes to Narlikar's contribution, he combined quantum theory with Einstein's theory of gravity using something that is known as Mach's principle, which says that the motion of one object is affected by the rest of the universe. So he showed that the properties of space and time could emerge from the interaction among particles and not from a fixed background, a very modern and deep concept. At the same time, he was extremely involved with popularization of science, simplifying complex physics through books. And in that order, he has written multiple books to break down and deconstruct difficult concepts into very simple ideas. Another person to have passed away yesterday happens to be M.R. Srinivasan, who built India's nuclear power plants. His key contributions include design and development leadership in the field of nuclear reactors, strategic infrastructure development, and resilience under international pressure. Now, if you are a choice and the first choice of a person like Homi Jahangir Bhabha, you are destined to be great. He was a part of the team that built Apsara, India's first research reactor. He refined pressurized heavy water reactor technology, which became the first nuclear power plants to give us nuclear energy. He enabled indigenous capability in nuclear reactor post 1974 Pokhran test. He played a key role in the creation of Tarapur and Kalkapang Kaiga Kakrapar, Rawatbhata and Narora nuclear stations, and he spearheaded the establishment of National Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. And in the wake of the nuclear testing, when the Western countries put sanctions on our country, he was the force of resilience to go ahead and demonstrate the domestic technologies in our country. The Indian government has proposed to open up part of the 6 gigahertz spectrum for license free use, which is a great news for tech companies like Sony, Apple, and Meta. Let's first understand why this is important. It is because it will enable faster Wi-Fi technologies like Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7. It supports next-gen gadgets for all of you guys like PlayStation 5 Pro and virtual reality headsets. And this is a step that is seen towards boosting digital infrastructure and Internet of Things growth in our country. Now, in order for this news to make sense for us, let's understand and break it down into pieces. First, spectrum. It is an invisible radio frequency used to transmit data such as Wi-Fi and mobile signals. So you know that every data is sent in the form of frequency of data packets. The frequency that is used is known as band. Now, because the Supreme Court has said that spectrum is a natural resource, in order to be able to transmit data at a particular frequency, let's say F1 or F2, would require you to purchase that specific frequency from the government. So when you listen to FM and when you listen to radio saying 98.3 Radio Mirchi or 92.7 Big FM, these people have paid the government to get the exclusive right to transmit data on that particular frequency. This is what is done in spectrum allocation. The government opens up new frequencies for allotment. Private companies bid for it. And that is when the government decided to allocate this particular spectrum in the form of delicensing. So after understanding what spectrum, let's understand what 6 gigahertz band. So it is a band of radio frequency between 5900 megahertz to 7100 megahertz, and generally it is known as 6 gigahertz band. This band is used to transmit wireless data like Wi-Fi and 5G signals. Now there has been a war with respect to the allocation of this particular band. Telecom companies wanted to reserve the band for 5G and 6G services only for licensed use. So only those people who have the license will be able to transmit the data on this particular band. Whereas tech companies like Apple and Meta wanted this particular 6 gigahertz band to be delicensed, which means that it is free to use by anyone. So even if I create a router which transmits the data at 6 gigahertz, I will be allowed to do that. But am I allowed to transmit the data at the frequency on which Reliance Jio or Airtel operates? Not at all. And this is what Jio and Airtel were lobbying, to make it only reserved for telecom companies, whereas the government has given the power to every person in our country to use this to whatever purpose they want to use it. And that is what delicensed spectrum means. A spectrum that can be used without government licensing. It encourages innovation and easier access, which will be used for Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7, which are Wi-Fi standards. They offer faster internet speeds, lower latency, and support more devices simultaneously, which is required for Internet of Things, where all the appliances at your home will be connected with internet operable through your mobile phones. If you have read this article, you must have read about International Telecommunication Union or ITU, which is a UN specialized agency that allocates global radio spectrum and satellite orbits. It is a key player in international telecom standards, extremely important from prelims point of view. Broadband India Forum is an industry association representing tech companies like Meta and Apple, which advocated for spectrum liberalization in our country.